We all rely on accurate information. It's the foundation of, well, pretty much everything, but it's especially crucial when it comes to things that directly impact our health and well-being.
Right, right. Think about it, like when you're talking about the medicines we take, or even, the dietary supplements that so many people use.
Yeah, yeah. It's those industries where, like, a single incorrect data point could have huge consequences. I mean, it could impact the effectiveness of a treatment or even, lead to safety concerns. It's a big deal.
Yeah, for sure. In those regulated environments like pharmaceuticals and dietary supplements, you absolutely have to have rock-solid data integrity. It's really the backbone of good manufacturing practices, or GMP as it's commonly known.
GMP, yeah. I mean, without that trust in the records, how can anyone be confident about the processes or the quality of the final product? You know what I mean?
You're exactly right. You can't. Data integrity is non-negotiable,
Mhm.
especially in these fields where, well, people's health is on the line.
Okay, so data integrity is essential. But for someone working in these fields, or even just for us, like as consumers who want to understand how these things work, like how is this high level of data integrity actually achieved and maintained?
That's where the LCOA plus framework comes in.
LCOA plus.
Yeah, LCOA plus. It's a globally recognized set of principles that act as a guide for ensuring that data remains trustworthy throughout its entire life cycle.
Interesting. So it's like a roadmap for making sure the data is reliable.
Exactly. It provides that practical guidance on how to create, maintain, and review records in a way that ensures every single data point is, well, as reliable as possible.
I like it. A roadmap to reliable data. Okay, so what does ALCOA plus actually stand for? Break it down for us.
Okay, so each letter stands for a key principle. It starts with ALCOA, attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate.
Attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate.
Got it. And then you add the plus, and that's where you get complete, consistent, enduring, and available.
Wow, that's quite a list to keep track of.
It is, but you know what? It's actually not as complicated as it might seem at first glance.
I hope not.
Yeah, no, I mean, once we break down each of these principles and really kind of dig into what they mean in practical terms, you'll see how they all work together to build that foundation of data integrity.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's unpack these principles one by one. So first up is attributable. What does that mean in the context of GMP?
So attributable basically means that every data entry, every action taken has to be clearly linked to the person who did it. Like no question who was responsible.
Right, makes sense. So like if I'm a scientist working in a lab and I'm writing down observations in my notebook, how do I make that data attributable?
That's a great question. And there are actually specific guidelines for that. The EAS Consulting Group, they have a great transcript on good documentation practices, and they emphasize that every single handwritten entry needs to include like the initials and the date
Yeah.
of the person who made it.
So initials and date, it's kind of like signing your work, right? Taking ownership of the data.
Exactly. It creates that direct link between the information and the individual who's responsible for it.
Yeah.
And it's not just about, assigning blame if something goes wrong.
No.
No, not at all. It's also about being able to go back and ask clarifying questions, or understand the context behind a particular data point.
Right, right. So like if there's a discrepancy or something seems off, you know exactly who to talk to.
Absolutely. That's
Right.
accountability.
Yeah.
And it's a big part of maintaining data integrity.
Okay, so we've talked about handwritten records, but what about in the digital world? Like so much of the data these days is electronic. How does attributable apply there?
That's where regulations like 21 CFR Part 11 come into the picture.
21 CFR Part 11.
Yeah, it's kind of a mouthful, but it's a really important regulation. It specifically addresses how to manage electronic records and signatures to make sure they're just as reliable as paper records. And one of the key ways they do that is through audit trails.
Audit trails. Okay, so remind me what an audit trail is.
An audit trail is basically a record of every action taken within an electronic system. It's like a digital paper trail, that tracks who accessed the system, what changes they made, and when those changes happened.
So it's like having a security camera for your data.
Exactly. And it's a critical part of ensuring attributability in a digital environment.
Makes sense. I even saw in the Chios Lunch and Learn transcript, they mentioned that principal investigators in clinical research are required to date their signatures, even on printed documents.
Oh, that's interesting.
It just shows how important it is to be able to trace every piece of data back to its source.
Absolutely. It reinforces that idea that accountability matters at every level of the process. you know?
Hmm.
It's not just about the folks on the ground, but also about the people who are ultimately responsible for the research or the product.
Okay, so we've covered attributable. What's next on our list?
Legible.
Legible. Okay, that seems pretty straightforward. Like, just make sure your handwriting is neat and tidy, right?
You'd think so.
Yeah.
But you know what? Legibility is often overlooked, and it can actually be a major source of errors and misunderstandings.
Really?
Yeah, think about it. If you're looking at a lab notebook and the handwriting is so messy that you can barely decipher what it says, it's easy to misinterpret the data, and that can have serious consequences.
Okay, yeah, I get that. So are there specific guidelines about legibility in GMP?
There are. The Easy Global Training video transcript actually goes into quite a bit of detail on this.
What do they say?
They recommend using black, indelible ink for all handwritten documents.
Black ink.
And they're
Okay.
very specific about it being indelible. No pencils or like erasable pens allowed.
Right, right. So it can't be easily altered or
Yep,
erased.
exactly. And they also emphasize the need for adequate spacing between lines. It's all about making the information as clear and easy to read as possible.
So it's not just about good penmanship, it's also about the formatting and layout of the document.
Absolutely. It all contributes to making the data accessible and preventing misinterpretations. And, even in the digital world, legibility still matters. Like, think about the font size and clarity of electronic records.
Yeah, that's a good point. You don't want to be squinting at a screen trying to decipher tiny text.
Right. So, legible may seem like a simple concept, but it's a critical part of data integrity.
Okay, next up on the LCOA plus list is contemporaneous. That's a big word.
It is. But it's actually a pretty simple concept. It means that records should be created at the time the activity is performed, not later.
So, like, document it as it happens.
Exactly. Real-time documentation.
Why is that so important? Can't you just, like, jot down some notes at the end of the day or something?
Hmm. Well, there are actually some serious problems with that approach, and multiple sources highlight those issues. Like the Easy Global Training video transcript. They talk about how documenting after the fact, they call it back entering, is a major GDP noncompliance.
GDP noncompliance. Okay, so that's a red flag.
Yeah, big red flag. And not only that, it can actually be considered fraudulent, especially if it's not done with a clear and justified audit trail.
Wow. Fraudulent, really.
Yeah, I mean, because when you document things after they've happened, you're relying on your memory, which, let's face it, can be pretty unreliable.
Right, right. We all forget things or misremember details.
Exactly. And in a regulated environment like pharmaceuticals or dietary supplements, you can't afford to have inaccuracies in the data. It's too risky.
I see your point. So contemporaneous documentation is about capturing the most accurate picture of what happened right when it happened.
That's it. It's about minimizing the chance of errors or omissions. And it's also about, preventing anyone from intentionally manipulating the data after the fact.
Okay, so contemporaneous is all about real-time documentation. Got it. What's next?
Original.
Original. So like the original source document.
Precisely. The original principle states that the first record of the data, like the primary source, is the most reliable and the one that needs to be preserved.
That makes sense. But why is it so important to have the original? I mean, what's wrong with a copy?
Well, copies can be altered or, misinterpreted. Think about it. Every time a document is copied, there's a chance that something could get lost in translation or, well, even intentionally changed.
I see what you mean. So the original document is like the master copy. It's the source of truth.
Exactly. It's the most authentic and trustworthy representation of the data. And it's especially important in cases where there might be personal information involved. Like the Cheos Lunch and Learn transcript talks about the caution around photocopying source documents that contain personal health information.
Right, right. You need to be extra careful about protecting that kind of sensitive information.
Absolutely. It all comes down to maintaining the integrity of the original record.
Okay, so original means stick to the source document. Got it. Next up is accurate. That seems pretty self-explanatory, right? Just make sure the data is correct.
Well, yeah, in theory. But accuracy in the context of GMP goes beyond just avoiding typos or, simple mistakes. It means that records have to be truthful, complete, and free from any errors.
Okay, so it's about the overall reliability of the data.
Exactly. The Cheos Lunch and Learn transcript really emphasizes honesty and accuracy, like even suggesting double-checking your work to make sure the data you're reporting is actually accurate.
So it's about being diligent and careful, taking the time to verify the information?
Absolutely. And, sometimes mistakes happen. We're all human. But the important thing is to have a clear and documented process for correcting those errors.
Right. So what happens if someone finds a mistake in a handwritten document?
The EAS Consulting Group video transcript, they outline the proper procedure for correcting errors. And it's really specific.
Okay, so how do you do it?
You draw a single line through the incorrect entry. You can't erase it or use whiteout.
No whiteout.
No whiteout. And then you initial and date the correction and provide a brief explanation for why the change was made.
So it's like a mini audit trail within the document itself.
Exactly. It's about transparency and accountability, even when it comes to mistakes. And this procedure, it's actually aligned with the requirements of 21 CFR Part 11 for electronic systems.
Oh, so the same principles apply whether it's a paper record or an electronic one.
Yeah, the goal is always to maintain the integrity of the record, to show that an error was made, but it was identified and corrected in a way that's, traceable and transparent.
Okay, makes sense. So we've covered the 5 core principles of ALCOA: attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate. Now for the plus. Let's start with complete. What does it mean for data to be complete in a GMP environment?
So complete means that every bit of relevant data is recorded, including any uh, deviations or unexpected events that might have happened during a process.
So it's not just about documenting things that went according to plan.
No, not at all. It's about telling the whole story, warts and all. Like the Cheos Lunch and Learn transcript. They make a point of saying that you have to ensure every entry is verifiable with a source. That's especially important in clinical research, where there are so many variables and potential for things to go, well, not exactly as planned.
Right, right. So if a piece of equipment malfunctions during an experiment, or there's an unexpected change in a patient's condition, you have to document it.
Exactly. You can't just cherry pick the data that makes things look good.
Yeah.
It's about providing a complete and accurate picture of what happened.
And I remember the EAS Consulting Group video transcript. They had a very blunt way of putting it. They said, if it's not documented, it didn't happen.
Yeah, that's pretty much the golden rule of GMP. And 21 CFR Part 211, it reinforces that idea, saying that complete and accurate records are absolutely essential for ensuring product quality.
So complete means everything gets documented no matter what. What's next?
Consistent.
Consistent. Okay, so what does that mean in this context?
Consistent means that data should be recorded in a uniform and logical manner across the board. So like using the same units of measure, standardized terminology, and consistent formatting for all the records related to a particular process.
Right, so everything is presented in a clear and standardized way.
Exactly. And while consistency might not be explicitly spelled out in one of our sources, it's actually a fundamental expectation in GMP.
Yeah.
It's kind of woven throughout the entire concept of standardized operating procedures, or SOPs as they're usually called.
FOPs, yeah. We've talked about those before.
And you'll find mentions of SOPs in multiple sources, like the EAS Consulting Group video transcript and 21 CFR Part 111.
So consistency makes the data easier to analyze and compare.
Exactly. It helps to eliminate confusion and prevent misinterpretations. And it's especially important when you're trying to track trends over time or compare data from different batches or experiments.
Okay, so consistent is all about standardization and clarity. Got it. What's the next principle on our list?
Enduring.
Enduring. That sounds interesting. What does that one entail?
Enduring essentially means that records need to be retained for a specific period of time, as determined by various regulations. So it's not like you can just throw away these records after a few months or even a few years. They need to be archived and preserved.
Oh, wow. So how long do they need to be kept for?
Well, it depends on the specific regulations and the type of record. Like the EAS Consulting Group transcript mentions retaining archive procedures for at least 6 years. And if those procedures were associated with a serious adverse event, then they might need to be kept even longer.
6 years, that's a long time.
It is. In 21 CFR Part 211, it also specifies retention periods for batch production and control records.
So why is it so important to keep these records for such a long time?
Well, for a few reasons. One is to allow for historical analysis. Being able to look back at past data can be really valuable for identifying trends or understanding the long-term effects of certain processes or products.
Like being able to track changes over time.
Yeah, exactly. And another reason is to be able to provide evidence of compliance during audits and inspections. Regulatory agencies like the FDA, they can come in and ask to see your records.
Right, right. So you need to be able to prove that you've been following the rules all along.
Exactly. And having those enduring records is critical for that. It's kind of like having a paper trail to show that you've been doing things the right way.
Okay, enduring means keep those records safe and sound. Got it. What's the last principle on our list?
Available.
Available. Okay, so that means that the records have to be accessible when they're needed, right?
That's right. Available means that you should be able to easily locate and retrieve any record when it's required, whether it's for a routine quality check or like a regulatory inspection or even an investigation into a potential problem.
So it's not enough to just have the records. You need to be able to find them quickly and efficiently.
Exactly.
Mm.
And while availability might not be explicitly mentioned in our sources, it's definitely implied in the discussion of efficient documentation management systems. Like the EAS Consulting Group video transcript, that they touch on that.
So it's all about having a good system for organizing and storing your records.
Right. If you have to dig through boxes or like sift through mountains of digital files to find the information you need, it defeats the purpose of having those records in the first place.
Yeah, that would be a nightmare, especially if you're in the middle of a regulatory inspection or trying to respond to a time-sensitive issue.
Exactly. So availability is really a key part of data integrity. I mean, the data is only valuable if you can actually access it when you need it.
Okay, so we've now gone through all 8 principles of ALCOA+. Attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate, complete, consistent, enduring, and available. It's quite a mouthful.
It is. But they all work together to create that foundation of data integrity in GMP environments.
So how does all of this actually translate into safeguarding critical information in the real world? Like, what are some concrete examples of how LCOA plus principles are used to protect data?
So imagine you're a pharmaceutical company and you're manufacturing a life-saving medication.
Okay, I'm imagining.
Now, every step of that manufacturing process, from the raw materials to the finished product, is carefully documented, and every record has to adhere to LCOA plus principles. So, for instance, the attributable principle ensures that every action taken during the manufacturing process is clearly linked to the person who performed it. So if there's a problem with a particular batch of medication, you can trace it back to the specific individual who was responsible for that step.
So it helps to identify where something might have gone wrong.
Exactly. And the legible principle ensures that all the documentation is clear and easy to read, which, reduces the chance of misinterpretations or errors.
Right, so there's no ambiguity about what was done or how it was done.
Yeah. And the contemporaneous principle, it ensures that all the documentation is done in real time. So there's no relying on faulty memories or potential for data manipulation.
Okay, I'm seeing how these principles all fit together.
And then the original principle, it ensures that the primary source documents are preserved and protected. So you always have that source of truth to refer back to.
And accurate, well, that one's pretty self-explanatory. You got to make sure the data's right.
Right. And then complete ensures that all the relevant data is recorded, including any deviations or unexpected events. So you have a full and accurate picture of what happened.
Okay, yeah, I'm getting it. And consistent ensures that all the data is presented in a standardized and logical manner.
Exactly. And enduring means those records are kept for as long as required by the regulations, so you have that historical data and evidence of compliance.
And available means that you can easily access the records when you need them, which is, well, essential for pretty much everything.
Right. So you can see how all of these principles work together to create that comprehensive system for safeguarding data integrity.
Absolutely. And I'm also thinking about that document we looked at with the analysis of FDA Form 483 observations.
Oh, right. The one that highlighted the recurring compliance challenges.
Yeah, it seemed like a lot of those issues, like problems with written procedures or lab controls or record keeping, they could often be traced back to a failure to follow one or more of the LCOA plus principles.
That's a great observation. When companies fall short in those areas, it often means there's a breakdown in data integrity somewhere along the line.
So ALCOA plus isn't just some theoretical concept. It has very real-world implications for how these companies operate and ultimately for the quality and safety of the products they produce.
Exactly. And, it's not just about following the rules. It's about building a culture of trust and responsibility where everyone understands the importance of data integrity and how it contributes to the overall quality of the product and ultimately to patient safety.
That's a really good point. So, for our listeners out there, whether you work in a regulated industry or you're just a consumer who relies on these products, ALCOA Plus is something to keep in mind.
It is. It's those principles that help ensure that the medicines we take, the supplements we use, they're manufactured to the highest standards of quality and safety.
This has been a really informative deep dive into the ALCOA plus principles. It's fascinating to see how something that seems maybe a bit dry on the surface can actually have such a profound impact on our lives.
It really does. Data integrity is foundational to so many things.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up here, I'd like to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. We're living in an increasingly digital world where electronic records are becoming the norm. So, how do we ensure that the original and enduring nature of data, which are so central to LCOA Plus, are maintained in this digital landscape?
That's a great question. It's something that the industry is grappling with right now.
Ah,
How to leverage the benefits of electronic record keeping while still upholding the principles of data integrity.
It's a challenge, but it's one that we need to address. And for those of you who are interested in learning more about this topic, I highly recommend checking out some of the resources we've mentioned today, like 21 CFR Parts 11 and 211. They're good places to start.
Yeah, those are key regulations. And the ICH guidelines, especially Q9 on quality risk management, that's also a great resource.
All right, folks, that's all for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us,
It's been a pleasure.
and we'll catch you next time.